Welcome back to the Somerville Brewcast, the official podcast of the Somerville Brew Alliance, located here in beer-soaked Somerville, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. I'm Jason Ng.
And I am the very excited Alex Rogers.
We are in the middle of one of our favorite breweries in Somerville, Massachusetts, the first brewery in Massachusetts.
The OG.
Aeronaut Brewing.
We're not the first in Massachusetts.
Sorry, not Massachusetts.
Far.
I'm so excited I don't even know what I'm talking about right now. Let's start over again.
Breweries in Massachusetts.
They made the first beer.
Talk to the Pilgrims.
Somerville, Massachusetts, Aeronaut Brewing. We're with Mike Smith. I was told it's not Mike Smith. Brewery
Nick Smith.
Technical director and visionary founder Ronn Friedlander. We were talking earlier, and we got into it. We wanted to know about the story of Dr. Nandu because that was one of your first beers that you made, and now we're drinking right now in front of us 4 years.
4 years with Dr. Nandu.
Yeah.
Every
The
year
Nandu saga continues, much to
it's so great.
some
We're so
people's
excited about
consternation.
If, like me, you have lived in Somerville and wandered the entire time, quite literally the entire time I've lived here, because day one of coming and living in Somerville, I came to Aeronaut Brewing.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is that about? And I've not had an answer. I've tried Google. I've tried everything. I've not, extensive research skills.
Oh, yeah.
I've Googled it.
The
You
same
can't
thing
find
about
it.
the logo, too. I think we need to get into that. But, yeah, story about Dr. Nandu. How did that all get started?
Good question.
Yeah.
We try not to over-explain our beer names because I think I like to have beer names that imply a story but don't tell it, so that you can kind of use
Leave
your
a little
imagination.
leave a little bit
Yeah.
of mystery.
Yeah, but
We've had that feeling with Nandu for about 2 years
It's
now.
been a very strong
yeah, you're like, oh, there's a story there,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna have to make it up myself because I don't know. And we've had a lot of people we had all kinds of people like guess at what the people came in and said, oh, I heard it was about this, I heard it was about that. Oh, there's all kinds of interesting things. I'm trying to remember now. Well, in any case, I'll tell you the real story, at least as I recall. It was like before we opened, we were prototyping beers, and so we had this whole scheme where we had this guy, this brewer that worked with us, Mike Labby, back then, and he was our brewer for the first year and probably close to a year before we opened. So when we were getting ready to open, we would still homebrew, and we do prototype recipes. So we drive out to his house, which is like an hour away.
Yeah.
And he had like a barn and a garage, so we brew in his garage. And we set up this whole like complicated fermentation system, temperature control, because we wanted to be able to really, nail these recipes and nail the consistency.
Yeah.
So we go out there, do 2 brews a day, and then we'd keg them, and then we'd bring them back to Somerville to our kegerator, and then we'd serve them out of our living room to like whoever would come by and drink them. So anyway, so we were prototyping a whole bunch of beers, and we had this idea of this like session IPA we wanted to make.
At the time, I'll just interject that was a big session. IPAs were sort of the big new style at the time, or a very popular style at the time. Where it's like, the big hoppy IPAs.
Right.
People started pulling them back, and this new concept of session IPA sort of came about.
Yeah.
So this is the
And they were
setting the
getting
scene.
big.
They were
Yeah, and it was
getting
after
big.
like people were getting sick of the bigger and bigger and bigger IPAs, more bitter. They were like, oh, actually we can make something a little more balanced, drinkable. And so we were personally inspired by a couple of beers. One was Founders All Day IPA, which I may have been relatively new back then. I don't know.
So that was like
and
the
then
quintessential one.
And that one was great. And then we also found this beer from this brewery in Barcelona. The brewery is called Gnu. I don't know how it's pronounced. And they had this beer called Renair.
It's pronounced wildebeest, but sorry.
The spelling
Yeah.
way up.
But like those 2 beers, we liked them. They were like light, hoppy. Some were a little bit floral, a little bit citrusy. And so we kind of were thinking, okay, we want something that would sort of, be a little bit sweet, a little bit citrusy, a light, hoppy beer. So that was the first recipe we worked on. Meanwhile, we hadn't named the brewery yet, but we had moved forward on our plans with, the lease, with construction, purchasing, and we're like, well, we can't hold back just because we don't have a name. We just got to keep forging and let's keep figuring out the brewery name. So at the time, we created a corporate entity, and it was called TBD Brewing, which is our actual name to this day.
You still get
Really?
things delivered
Yeah.
here
Fantastic.
to DBD.
Yeah, and if you email me at tbdbrew.com, it'll still come to me.
Are you sure you want that on the
So
podcast?
direct email.
Well, they can find my email
As opposed to at Aeronaut.
yeah,
Right,
They'll
right.
figure it out.
yeah. So
Oh, that's interesting.
you'll edit that out. Just do the beep sound over.
Loud air horns will just pick up anything you don't want.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're sitting there. There's one night we were sitting in our living room or kitchen or something, and we were drinking beers that we had brewed, and we were thinking about, we have to get this name figured out. You know, we got to start branding things. Investors want to see what it's going to look like.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we started, you know, we'd have these naming powwows. This happened over and over and over again. We couldn't come to an agreement. And this guy, a friend of ours, whose name is Nandu, his last name is Nandu, was hanging out at the house, and he kept coming up with these names, but they were like totally ridiculous. We were like, we couldn't name a brewery that, like, and he would always like draw a picture of what the logo would look like, and so we're sitting there with like a little marker board, and he's like, how about Guitar Dick Brewery? And it was like a guy with like a guitar penis, and he's playing the guitar. And,
Like, yeah, I can see them getting really excited about investing.
Yeah,
in
Awesome.
yeah.
That is not a problem at all.
yeah,
This
so
man is an actual doctor, by the way.
he is actually a radiologist
An MD doctor.
at a nearby hospital, very prestigious.
So he knows all about boners.
Yeah.
He's very medically
This is scientific.
oriented.
Yes. I've seen so many guitar dicks
You
come
would
through
not.
this hospital.
The things I
That's
see.
a real story based on a real story. So there's that. There was like sloth hat, which is like a guy wearing a sloth on his head. So we're like, okay, none of these are going to work, but we felt we owed it to him to give him a name. And so at some point we came up with like a session with Dr. Nandu for this beer, because it's a session beer. And we were like, oh, because we have this naming session with Dr. Nandu, we're sitting around naming things. But then I had this in my mind. It
Sounds
was
like a
like
psychiatrist.
Yeah,
like
seriously.
exactly. So in my mind, like, you know those old Norman Rockwell paintings where they're all like, kind of like realistic, and they're like, you know, it's like a doc. They're always in doctors' offices, you know, and they're like the doctor, and he's like listening to someone's heart. So I had this idea for the label, which would be like a doctor in his office, you know, in his like doctor's office with all the certificates behind him, and he's like huffing a bag of ether, and it says like a session with Dr. Nandu. And that was like the concept for the beer, and so that was actually the beer, the first recipe we ever made, and then it was a recipe we had here once the brewery opened, and then after our first anniversary, we did a year with Dr. Nandu as like the 1 year IPA beer, and then
great.
we eventually like discontinued a session with Dr. Nandu.
Oh, that was the riots. All the riots that happened when you discontinued.
Yeah, that was the riots of 2015. That was what
I was
kicked
in
it
that.
off.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we kind of like Hop and Away kind of took its place, but then
Year with Nandu is one of our
Year with
best sellers
Nandu is
still.
like now our flagship IPA, and then we do 2 years with Nandu, 3 years with Nandu. This
Right.
year we have 4 years,
years.
which I think you're drinking right
Which is
now.
fantastic. I had it when
Yeah.
it first. I think when you guys normally roll that out, I think it's like
June
March or-
21st.
Yeah, we have been, June 21st is the anniversary date, but we do basically 4 canning runs of it. So
Gotcha.
we've done a couple small in-house draft only batches, but we try for the anniversary beer, it's kind of a year-long thing, so we do 4 quarterly canning runs of it.
Oh, got it.
Quarterly, like 25 barrel canning runs.
So
of it.
how do you
this is the
decide?
second run.
This is the second run. Yeah.
How do you decide on the flavor profile of the makeup? Because I know there are variations each time, right?
They are indeed. Mark Bowers, who's our brewmaster, does a lot of the recipe formulation stuff. And he is a master. I consider him a master of the New England IPA style. I do some of the recipe development here, but mine tend to be not
Like-
necessarily New England, more traditional
hazy,
style.
juicy style.
And there's one of the things I like is that about Aeronaut. Is that we have a place for all of them. You know, we're very, very. I think we do a lot of really strong New England IPAs and like sort of cutting edge new. And that's going back to what Ron was saying. That story about Year with the whole Nandu story is that's actually progression of craft beer in the last. It's a microcosm of craft beer in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Because like when they came up with Session with Nandu, that was like the style of like the hot new style of beer, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
very popular progressive style of beer. And like, and, you know, beer. You know, one of the things I like about being in this industry is that it's from the old. It's one of the oldest professions since the literal dawn of time. 7,000-8,000 years ago, people were making beer. But there's still new stuff. There's still New England IPA, which is new in the last 3 years. So it's kind of neat, like taking this. There's not much to it. There's hops, barley, yeast, and water. But by mixing and matching and using, Harpoon. New England style IPA is more of a new techniques than it is new ingredients.
Right.
Which that hazy, like it's, thinking about it, it's like basically doing things wrong, but getting really interesting hop characters out of it. So like the haze, this is something that kind of bugs me now, is that people are going for the haze.
Right.
Whereas haze in the development of New England style IPA, and this is new within the last 5 years, the development of that style was like haze was an unfortunate but acceptable byproduct of these new hopping techniques.
Right.
Yeah. And now it's turned into
But that's become the signature of the style.
Right.
And people
now you're
have equated haze with the thing, and now people. That's bush league, man. If you talk about flour, you have to turn around and walk right out.
But it's a good way. It's a good sort of diagnostic test. Like, if you've made it right, it should be hazy.
Right.
Naturally.
Right.
And there's all kinds of reasons for that, but
people are faking it now. It's just a little.
There's a whole lot
It's
of
the
faking
cart
out
running.
there.
It's the cart following the
But
horse.
interestingly, about getting back to the Nandu thing, Nandu has become a New England IPA, and when we do the anniversary beers, 4 years with Nandu, 3 years, even 2 years were New England. I would say New England.
And a lot of
IPAs.
that is the development of Mark's recipe development.
And trying to make it like more intense, more juicy, and always slightly stronger. It seems like year to year.
Less
but the
bitter,
one
more
Is it
year,
like IPU or
no
ABV?
ABV.
Okay.
And but 1 year, which we still brew, a year with Dr. Nandu, that's like I guess you could call it one of our flagship brands, is I would call actually like a West Coast style IPA.
Absolutely,
it's like clear. It's more bitter. It's not in the same style of a New England. So
Sort of a traditional
IPA. Well, American.
A traditional American craft brewed IPA.
Yeah, I think people actually sort of forget, especially in this region, what an IPA is. Traditional IPA looks like, 'cause they're so used to seeing these hazy IPAs. They think that unless it has hazy, it's not an IPA. Like they'll think it's just like.
I would love if we could go back 5 years, because these are great beers. But I would like to separate them from IPA.
Yeah,
because IPA has this long, storied tradition from the early 1800s, even before that, late 1700s, that eventually evolved into this style of beer, which is known as India Pale Ale. And there's a storied tradition, a historical tradition of IPA. And it is a certain thing. It's not what has become New England IPA. New England IPAs are wonderful drinks, wonderful beers. But I would love if we could go back in time and separate them at a certain moment.
Especially
but I think a lot of
they
that
talk about like you have to drink them in so much
but
time,
even,
like it's against the tradition of like what they were even built for to begin with.
Exactly.
So,
That's
That's
a
kinda
very,
funny.
very interesting point. Like I was talking to someone about that the other day. Like they developed out of stock ales that were meant to be stored for a long time, and now it's like,
No,
this is something
immediately.
drink fresh. Or now
Clock
people
is
are doing
running.
them, and I absolutely don't agree with this. But people are making beers that are not necessarily safe for customers to bring home, that are not done, that still have fermentables in them, and like people are putting fruit fermentables into unfiltered beers with yeast.
That can change.
It's just going to take one lawsuit, man.
Yeah.
I think that's a little.
Oh, you just
this
gotta
is a person.
sign a
This is
waiver
not
before you take it home, right?
which is insane. The
hot,
first thing
spicy
is
wings. You're very dangerous IPA.
First thing is don't hurt people.
Right.
Enjoy it. Beer's supposed to be.
No, that's
the
for the
Hippocratic
doctors.
Oath of beer
Dr.
making.
Nandu.
Typical of a brewery.
But again, like,
It's
going
centered
back to
around
the-
doctor, they think that has to be healthy.
Again, using the story of session with Nandu, going into the years of Nandu as an example. That's literally an example of craft beer in the last couple of years. Because just as session IPAs are wonderful beers, this is a personal opinion here. I don't like the style of session IPA because there was a beer called that. It's called a pale ale. But what happened is around that time, 5-6 years ago, is that people equated. That's right when craft brew was really taking off in a mainstream level. and folks latched on to the stuff. IPA became synonymous with craft beer to the point, but it's the analogy I use is Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, where in the 80s Cabernet Sauvignon came out and everyone's like, wine snobs, I want to drink Cabernet, but there are these tannic bombs, like they're like these huge wines that are a little too much wine for people. And then Merlot came around and it was like, ding 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 ding. It's like, you really want, this is the wine you really want. Even though you want to order a Cabernet Sauvignon, this is the wine that you want. And I think that people were comfortable ordering IPA, but a lot of them were a little more bitter for people just getting into the beer. So that's what Session IPA was a way of the race to 100 IBUs.
Yeah,
I'll tell you a story about that too. But there was like these Session IPAs were basically a way of leveraging the marketing of IPA, but giving people a more appropriate. Sounds patronizing, but it's true. A more appropriate beer, like a lower IBU, a more drinkable. You don't need something that's 80 IBUs and 7.5% alcohol. Most people don't want to drink that all day long. Depends on the crowd, right?
All right, so I want to get into something that you guys like. You were just talking about before we started recording, which was you just got out of like this naming meeting. I don't think we've ever discussed this with any brewer before. It's like, so you guys were talking about the the process of naming beers, and I guess you guys don't go into some sort of well, maybe you could just like tell us your process, because I feel that some people have this idea of what they want to brew, like if you're say like a home brewer or something like that, and then maybe they already have a name associated with it. And you guys seem to like have a brew, and then you're just like having a meeting about what you should name it. Well, what's the process behind that, or who's even in the meeting here?
It's a great question. It's like there's too many beer. We make too many beers to be pre-naming them. It would be just crazy, and it's so much work to name a beer that if we pre-named beers that we were prototyping and then they didn't make it to the full scale, it'd be a real waste of names.
You gotta limit that creative juice, like
really you do, and not just that, but you have all these restrictions because you don't want a name that's been used already,
right?
And that's a big limiter because we look up, we find a name and we look it up and we're like, there's like 5 of those. 2 of them are home brews, but 3 of them are real breweries, And
we discussed that you don't like puns either. Even like, I love puns.
We have some limits.
Like we try not to make too many rules, but there's certain rules that we have, and they're not like official public rules, but we have certain rules about how we name beers. We don't generally use puns because they can get old really quickly. So it sounds funny the first time you hear it, but then when there's a beer you drink every week, ideally, then then you're ordering and you're like, it's not funny anymore. Now you're just saying this weird word play. So
there's some of the rules. Well, one of the things I'd mention is like, we talk about homebrew. Like there are styles of beer and there are names of beer, and so internally when we're developing recipes, we always develop to style, where you figure out what the finished product you want it to take, what you want to drink. And that's the easy part. It's so easy. Like when I say easy, it's relatively easy to coming out. We have a wonderful palette of ingredients. We play around. We have tradition, but then we want to push tradition, and we have, this. That's easy. That's like tangible stuff. But then naming goes into marketing, and so there's a big difference. Like when you talk about homebrewers, first of all, best hobby in the world, because it's the only hobby where you end up with more beer than you started with. Every other hobby is the other way around. You end up with less beer. But it's like when you're making up a beer is one thing because you're going to style. But then when you're trying to sell that beer to people, then it becomes marketing. Because you're going to have the best beer in the world with a bad name, or you can have, I know a lot of, I won't go into specifics, but some really not great beers that have wonderful marketing and names.
Oh, right. I
that
think everybody's
will knock it out of the park, and they're two.
And that's
they
what
are
gets you to
separate.
pull it off the shelf.
There are separate things, like coming up with the names, but
like right now we're sitting underneath are all of our old beer signs that are not in use right now.
Which is what I love. So this is
Yeah.
we're in the back portion of the brewing of the tap room right now, and I'm always kind of stunned by it because there are so many signs up for things that have been brewed before, and I've had the vast majority of them, so it always gives me a little bit of pause. I'm like, ooh,
And many
problem.
of them will be again.
And I love all the, but it's really cool.
It's
to
like
show
looking
those-
at a memorial wall
Right.
because you know that they're like not up on tap right now. It's like,
Yeah.
are these
so
the
we
fallen
There were
sword
two.
shoes of,
Forrest literally just came and
Aeronaut?
took 2 of them off that were just put on, like
Yeah.
rebrews
awesome.
that we put on.
A lot of these are destined to be brewed again.
That's so
Typically,
great.
otherwise we'll end up erasing these. But you'll notice there's a bunch of them that are pilots that have like pilot numbers,
Yeah.
P266,
Right,
P257. And those typically don't have names. They're just, the name is just a description, like
Strawberry rhubarb.
strawberry rhubarb fruited IPA, or spruce tip double IPA. Like, because that's just a description of the beer that we wanted, and that's pretty much how all of our beers start.
Got it.
And then when we decide we're gonna move it to the production scale, now we have this system where when it's slated into the production schedule, we have to sit down, we have to name it before
Got it.
it gets brewed, before it gets input
Once it
into
gets
all of
in the
our
computer.
ingredient systems and recipe books,
Yeah.
so that there's no confusion.
Do you always test your beers before you have an official name? So do you always have like, you know, like the pilot batch out to see how it does and then you decide to name it?
Not
always.
always. We do some different tracks. We prototype. We have a 1-barrel direct fire system, and we have
Oh, okay.
7. It's a prototype system. It's a 1-barrel, and we have 7 1-barrel fermenters. And that allows Mark does a lot. Mark runs that program. He does a lot of like we'll work on like long-term projects, building up things, working on some pastry stouts and a lot of the double IPA stuff. And
Got it.
playing around with new ingredients. We've got a couple things up our sleeves.
One thing that I think is really interesting when you're here, and one thing that immediately caught my attention within the first few visits, and it might actually have been you now that I'm thinking about it, Mike, is when I come here, I see people that will come from the back room here, pure lab coat, grab a
Oh,
beer,
yeah, right.
and walk right back.
That'd be Randy.
It's really
You've seen it.
and it always
Yeah.
makes me go, did I
The
just
white
see
lab
that?
coat is the
lab
best.
coat.
It's the best. Yeah, you're like,
What is going on back
it's the most
there?
fascinating thing. It stops everybody in their tracks, and they're
It's
like,
like-
am I seeing a ghost?
With and he was like he wears it over shorts, and I'm like,
That
looks
is
like he's like
perfect.
a
got the
Cambridge, it's like
patch on it.
Cambridge, like a overeducated flasher. His lab coat with like shorts underneath. Well, it's research and development.
Yeah, it's
That's what we call it, research and development. When you're
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions in here that I wanted to ask you guys. You seemed like the founders and what this brewery was kind of like developed around was like this very nerdy vibe of sciencey roots deal that's based around the Aeronaut thing. And I was wondering if you could kind of like elaborate around the whole Aeronaut Labs thing that was going on, and all of the yeast studies that you guys were doing.
Yeah, so I guess we were we were living together before we started, roommates, and at least 2 of us were in grad school studying biology and bioengineering and stuff like that. So that was always a big focus of ours. Like, we were all science and engineer guys by training.
right.
So that was always something that we sought to incorporate in the brewery as we built it. And we said, I was a microbiologist. I studied bacteria and how they stick to things and surfaces and things like that. And so to me, it was like, as I learned about yeast and brewing, I was like, well, why can't I be culturing these things myself? This should be relatively easy to do. Turns out it's not. I mean, it's the basics of it are easy, but like to actually achieve something.
well, people
to,
were
like,
doing
yeah.
it for tens of thousands of years.
Well, yeah,
before.
Right.
but not
Yeah.
in
Or
this,
just like
not
open
in scientific
fermenting
power,
beer.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
whatever happens, happens.
It's
So,
hard
you
to find
know-
a good cave in Somerville to just throw beer in the back of.
Yeah, that's
yeah. I don't know. I mean, when we were doing the proto brewing in our before we opened, we were doing all the test brewing. I would take wild yeast and isolate them and bring them. I'd do it in the lab I was working in
Right.
over at Harvard, and I would make little plates of yeast, and then I'd bring them back, and I was like, all right, let's try this one.
That's awesome.
And one of those we actually still have to this day. that we use in one of our very popular beers.
ABC2?
ABC2, Aeronaut Brewing Company 2, which is used in Hop Up and Away, among others.
A lot of them, actually. Yeah.
But we have, from day one, we were like, okay, we can culture our own yeast. We don't need to be totally reliant on buying everything. We can do a lot of our quality control. So day one, we opened. We didn't have this nice lab set up in the back. We actually set everything up in the corner of the brewery, in the back corner. We just had an autoclave. We could sterilize things. Had a little table with a microscope, and that was pretty much it. And then over time, we decided to give it its own space, and we moved it back into this lab space here. We bought more equipment. We did a lot more QC stuff. We added more techniques. We started doing our own yeast. Did like wild yeast cultivation. We did a few different wild beers we did with those wild yeasts. And we kind of just developed the lab, developed the protocols, and that just has always been a thing since we started.
And I will say, like, your yeast strains seem so unique. Like, I can tell blind tasting that I'm having an Aeronaut beer because the quality seems higher and, like, just has a unique taste to it. And you can identify it. I can say that if you line up other beers back to back, I couldn't necessarily identify where it's coming from, but something that comes from Aeronaut, I can definitely identify from not only, like, the smell, but the taste and everything. The feel of it overall, even, you can identify Aeronaut. And I'm sure that's because of these the care that goes into it, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, they say so. I mean, it's probably a large number effect, but the
blind squirrel gets a note every once in a while.
Yeah, but they say that
not everything tastes the same. That's great.
That's true. No, I mean, it's important to us to like.
Well, one nice thing about being, I'm sorry to jump in, but we were talking about the lab, and you were talking before about how we are in Camberville. The Cambridge Summit. I've been up on the roof. You can see Harvard. You can see the theater from Harvard. You can see Harvard Square from the roof. It's half a mile away.
Yep.
One advantage, in addition to having people like Ron, who are, Dr. Friedlander over here, educated people, we also have access to some relatively reasonably priced used lab equipment locally, which is something that not every brewery. Like we have a cryo fridge, we have a laminar flow hood, we have 4 or 5 incubators, stuff that
those
we
are
wouldn't
things that
necessarily.
I've never seen in any.
You wouldn't necessarily find. Well, they're of our size. We are we are very well equipped for a brewery of our size.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of nice. And also, I think it has, like, our clientele, like our regular, the people who come here tend to be a lot of Harvard people, a lot of MIT people, and just, obviously just regular old Somerville folks like you and I. But it's actually...
I love drinking my beer out of an Erlenmeyer. I don't know about you.
We should do that. That's fun.
Yeah.
5-year.
There you go.
Beakers.
Just selling it.
We should get beakers with handles
We
on
were
them.
talking about trying to do like a flight of beakers at one point. But.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you could see like a little test tube
beers or something.
Yeah.
But
That'd be awesome.
we don't want to get too hokey.
Yeah.
But when we're in the lab, we taste out of beakers all the time. And we do like test brews. And we'll do test brews with wild yeast. And we'll do that.
What is say like with ABC2? You said there's like the yeast that's in Hop and Away, like your big beer. What makes that yeast so great for you that you think that it's
it's the flavors that they produce. We have all kinds of different yeasts that we'll work with, and some people will say, "Oh, yeast is responsible for like 80% of the flavor in beer," and there's different ways to like measure that, quantify that. So it's a little bit, subjective. But yeah, yeast can have these profound effects on the flavors of beers, and we've done things where we've made the same beer with 2 different yeasts, and they're completely different. You use a saison yeast versus one of these like ABC2. It's totally different. ABC2 is like a relatively clean yeast. But it does create these very fruity, not like Belgian fruity flavors, like stone fruit, peachy, kinds of flavors that are really complementary to the kind of hops and the flavors we want in certain kinds of IPAs.
Right.
So I really like that. There's other yeast that will create, banana flavors, or yeast that have these. Yeah, I don't know. Different kinds of like Belgian phenolic flavors. There's yeast that tastes like pineapple, and it's just there's probably a lot more out there that we haven't messed around with yet. I was just at a yeast conference in Argentina.
You're at a yeast conference?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was awesome. And it was down in Argentina, and they had like their own isolated wild yeast from that area. It turns out is like the ancestor yeast to what we call modern lager yeast. And they started domesticating this wild ancestor yeast to make beers
this is
with
how
it.
the zombie apocalypse starts. It's like, we found this old yeast, we've cultured it, we've not
And
released
now
it before.
we've-
We've got
Well, they did,
all
and
the
it
top
ended up with
scientific
Budweiser.
minds here.
Yeah.
The zombie apocalypse. Yeah.
That's what happened. Came out of the jungle in South America.
Yeah.
Turned
That's it.
into,
But
Well, you mentioned like the banana flavor. You guys have one of my favorite. I call it banana runt candy beer. That seems like derogatory, but I love it. I love that flavor. The Herman.
Herman Hesse. So that is
Love
actually
that.
Yeah.
ours. We call them R numbers. Actually, I'm in the process of doing R 228. Herman Hesseweizen, by the way, is R001.
oh,
That's
yeah,
the original
first-
recipe. And Saison of the Western Ghats is number 2.
And now that is not because it's the first recipe.
It's the first
the first
production.
production beer we ever made here.
Oh,
Because the
okay.
Nandu, Session with Dr. Nandu, came before it, but we didn't brew it
Wasn't brewed.
here until like a week later because
Got
we
it.
had already designed that recipe, and we said this is the first time we ever brewed on that system, on the production system. We said let's
Yeah.
do the simplest, one of the simplest grain bills. It's actually a cheaper beer to produce, so in case it gets fucked up, we can
It's not a
dump
big
the
deal,
whole
yeah.
thing. So it was a good decision
We have
for
the
starting point.
we have the Dunkelbock on right now. Have you tried that?
No, I haven't.
We're getting low here, so that'll be the next round. Actually,
Perfect.
I want one more thing about actually the ABC2 before I drink this last sip. This beer is with ABC2. One of the ABC2.
Wait, which beer is that?
This is called People Power. It's a beer
Oh,
that we
okay.
did. It's a hoppy, weedy. It's a wheat IPA basically. But one of the things when you look at the part of the haze, going back to when we were talking about haze, one of the things, it's a little technical, but they call it biotransformation. There's some sort of yeast. There are yeast. Certain species of yeast react with and modify certain hop compounds.
Right.
That this is, in a nutshell, what I said before, that the haze was a acceptable byproduct of getting
Yeah.
these flavors. That part of that haziness is this sort of biotransformation that happens. This yeast, like in the hop, that's a relatively hazy beer. It's not so crazy hazy, but it's relatively hazy.
Yeah.
And that's ABC2 yeast. This is ABC2 as well, and it dropped out really clear. So depending on, that's something we're not going to get too into it, but that's something that we, on our technical brewing side,
Yeah.
that we can coax out of the wort that allows us to have these two different manifestations of that same yeast. And that's one of the cool things. Like, so that's one of our, we effectively have 3 house yeasts.
That's
ABC2
amazing.
being one
Yeah.
of them. And this one, so we basically have, we have like a really traditional American ale yeast, a really sort of not common, but more specific sort of New England IPA yeast, like the 3-year uses, which is all about the biotransformation. And then ABC2, which is kind of in the middle, which can go either way depending on what beer we're doing. And it's kind of it's a nice beer as like a recipe designer. It's a nice yeast to have in my quiver or my box of tools.
'Cause of all the variations.
So you can go either way. We can go either way with it, and we get these kind of interesting fruity flavors out of it.
Very cool.
Depending upon subtle differences and subtle technical stuff. Very subtle technical stuff can make the beer do.
Yeah, it's
kind of
amazing
weird
that you get
things.
those two distinctly different, not only visual but taste variations out of the same yeast. So that's
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
really
coaxing
cool.
it out.
I mean, the other cool thing about having the lab and the setup we have now is we do have this like deep freezer, minus 80 degree cryo freezer for our yeast, and so we have this massive library of yeast strains that are we keep them, and they could be stored indefinitely in that freezer and used whenever we want. So we have probably over 100 different yeast strains in there.
Right.
And so we have our 3 that are probably the most frequently used in the regular rotation, but we do have, I would say, at least a dozen other strains that we use for recipes on a seasonal basis, on a rotating basis. And then we're always experimenting with others and trying to bring in new, not all stuff that we cultivate ourselves. Some of them are like these old heirloom Norwegian yeast. Like we have a whole bunch of those we're
Yeah.
trying to mess around with. We
There's one that harvested from a 100-plus-year-old.
Oh yeah, 100-year-old bottle of beer from Bunker Hill Brewery, which
Really?
went out of business in like the 30s or something.
Yeah.
But we got a bottle. Someone gave us a bottle that was unopened from like the 1800s, like late 1800s, and we did this whole process with a needle, like going through the cork and extracting the
Oh,
yeast.
that's nuts.
Yeah,
We were actually
I
just
made
talking
beer out
about
of made a
prior-
product. Do we make a production beer of that, or has it only been protos? So
I think only pilots.
Oh, we've done
yeah.
some pilot, like
That's
good ones.
very cool.
Yeah.
We actually just did an episode where we were talking about a shipwreck that was discovered like in Australia.
Yeah,
with-
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I was trying to get this yeast out of the bottle,
Yeah.
I contacted that guy, the professor from
really?
Australia who did that. I was
Really?
like, "How'd you do it? What were the, because I wanted to know. You get one chance, If
Right.
it doesn't grow, that's it. So, and
Or
he
if
was-
it gets contaminated.
or if it gets well, right. And so then there's a question: and do you know if it gets contaminated? So I added some layers of assurance to that by taking samples that we could sequence, and then you'd know if it grew or didn't grow. You could compare it to the original
right.
sample
Right.
and sequence the DNA and see if it's the same. So that was kind of the hope for checking that we didn't get some random contaminant, that we got the same thing that was in the bottle originally growing. But I contacted that guy and he was like, he was pretty straightforward. He was like, it's not that
Just
complicated.
chug
You
the beer.
like-
Just
Yeah.
open and chug the beer and dump
Open
it in
your
it.
mouth,
Right.
dump it in your face.
Yeah. We drank some of
This
that
was
beer.
alright.
We did drink some.
We drank some of that. Oh, that was
The
delicious.
100-year-old
It was
beer.
like
Yeah.
sherry.
Yeah, it tastes like cherry.
Really?
Talk about drinking out of beakers. That was like
Yeah. Well,
It's what we were wondering is like, what does beer even do? It's been in a bottle that long. Except
Yeah, it was like honestly, like, is the yeast like affecting, like, say, the smell on top of that taste? Like, I know
Oh, yeah.
you're talking about like the phenolic things. It's like, are there a whole lot of aromatics that come out?
well,
of
that
the
was like yeast.
products
I
of
mean,
the
you
yeast?
had. I only had it one time. You probably had more. You tried it more throughout the process, probably.
I've had it like
of the
2
beer.
times. Yeah.
But we drank the last of it not too long ago, and at that point, it turns into more a sum of oxidative.
Yeah.
Oxidative.
It becomes more
It becomes
chemical.
more. Like
Transformative.
when I say sherry, it's like one of the. When we do our sensory tastings, or when one does sensory tastings, one of the tricks about sensory and learning is getting the proper vocabulary, because someone can say something, or it's like if somebody calls
right.
it, "Oh, this tastes like this." It's like there's somewhat of a standardized vocabulary, but it's not as standardized as it should be. In order to, if someone is like, "Oh, this beer tastes like this," of some byproduct or something, it's like,
Right.
and they mention it to me, it's like, well, oh, this tastes like it's skunky. They say, but it's like. Skunky actually is there's a very specific vocabulary. Skunky is isoalpha acid that gets light struck, turns
Right.
into this compound that smells like a skunk.
Yeah.
But also, like when you're in college and you're pumping the air into a Miller Light,
Yes,
and
exactly.
it tastes like that in some people's minds is quote skunky.
Right.
It's not that is not a useful description. But so we have this sort of standardized vocabulary, and one of sherry-like
Yeah.
is a very common and proper vocabulary to describe oxidative flavors. And so, like this 100-year-old beer, it tasted like a really good, like after dinner, and after
that's
like a
so
really
cool.
well-aged beer. But like so much of the sherries and all that are aged, and like, that's one of the
Right.
reasons you actually see the barrels on one side we have the chalkboards, on the other side we have the barrels. One of the things about barrel aging beer is that controlled oxidation. 'Cause, like in stainless steel, where most of our beer is aged, there's the whole concept is should be no oxidation going on. Whereas in barrels or in this 100-year-old bottle, like no matter what, there's always a certain amount of air in a liquid, because liquid holds gas, period. And over 100 years, even if there was really low, I'm sure they didn't have low DO, dissolved oxygen back then when they put it in the bottle. But even now, if you keep anything that long, it's going to develop those flavors. And in a lot of times, those are, what do you think about barley wines, Belgian ales, the original October beers, going all the way back when we started talking about that turned into IPA,
Right.
are these aged beers, and that oxidative, those oxidative flavor compounds are part of what you are looking for. They're not necessarily bad things. They can be good things. And that's what this, I'm sure it didn't taste anything like the original, beer that they intended it, but it was a very, very pleasant liquid to consume. And special because they're so unique.
So I guess now is a good time to ask, because it seems like the other tenants are starting to line up their spaces as well. What's it like sharing space with? Because you have a chocolatier here, and then you have a restaurant as well.
Yeah. The tasting counter, which is delicious, by the way.
Yeah, several members of our group have been there.
And you have like a climbing wall in the space too. Like it
There's
seems
just
like
a lot going on.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that's going on, and it seems to be like in the middle of Somerville. I know we talked about earlier where you were like, oh, this seems like this kind of like forgotten corner when you first opened up here. But like, how has it been?
It's become a hive of
since
activity.
then? Yeah, right. Because you're sharing with so many different places. What's it been like here?
I mean, I think the transformation we see here is sort of a microcosm for like what's happening in Somerville as a whole, or what has been happening. And this has become, they call this like the innovation hub now.
Right.
It's a fabrication district. It's like all these makers, people who are kind of taking this old industrial space and turning something a little more modern, a little more useful in
envelope factory.
Yeah, this whole this whole building and the 3 blocks around it were all one continuous envelope factory.
Really?
Up until not that long ago, 10 years ago.
Wow.
And then through a bunch of transactions, this became not an envelope factory, but the owners retained it, and they said, what we're going to do with, I forget how many square feet, some huge amount of space that no single tenant's going to want. So they started subdividing it, and Artisans Asylum moved in, Brooklyn Boulders moved in, we moved in,
because it's big buildings with they're tall.
Yeah, it's huge, and there's all kinds of weird corners of this building. Like, it's crazy, and it's been, I think when it was built, it was just added on piece by piece as the company grew.
Yeah.
They even built over an old street, like this road per Persia used to cut all the way across the tracks.
Oh, really?
And they just put a building over it, and now it turns. That's why the street name changes when you turn the corner.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's super weird. Anyway, so this has been kind of transforming, and even within our space, when we first moved in, it was just a huge amount of space for us. We never envisioned we'd need that much space, at least anytime soon. We were kind of thinking, how are we going to make enough beer to pay these bills?
Seriously.
And of course, we had to recalibrate once we opened and figured out how the business is actually going to run compared to our models. We had this idea that we could turn this half of the space where the ceilings are a little bit lower into this thing we called the Foods Hub, which you'll see on that sign there. And the idea was that all these little bays would belong to different subtenants, small companies that could benefit from an industrial space.
Right.
That we have a loading dock, we have an industrial zoning, we can manufacture things here.
Right.
But people who aren't necessarily interested in buying or renting thousands of square feet. So when we started up, we had Somerville Chocolate here, which makes chocolate from cacao.
Who just opened up their lights, by the way. They just turned them on.
Yeah.
They're getting ready to do something.
They're getting ready to sell chocolate products.
That's awesome.
And then this area used to be another food sale. They did local groceries, basically. They were there for a couple of years, and they left. And then that corner used to be a coffee shop, Barismo, which is still around, but not here. But they were roasting coffee here. And then we have tasting counter down there, the restaurant.
Right.
And then over time, as some of the tenants started to move out, and some people needed bigger spaces, some people failed, and as startups do.
Right. Well, it seems like you've kind of taken over.
We've taken it over because we realized, wow, we actually really need all this space to make beer, and we're kind of maxed out now.
Has your equipment grown over time?
Oh,
What type of system, or how many barrels can you brew now as compared to say year one?
So the system we have is still the original system, which is our 8.5 barrel, 10 hectoliter German style system that we bought used from this guy in Florida.
Wow.
And we brought that up here, and we've always been brewing on that. When we started, we had 3 fermenters. We had 2 10 hectoliter fermenters and a 20 barrel fermenter.
Okay.
And we quickly realized we needed a little bit more, so we bought a couple more fermenters new. we bought like a used 15-barrel fermenter from Pennsylvania, where Dan drove down in a box truck and got the fermenter up here. Then it immediately had a leak, and we had to have welders come in and fix it. Yeah, and then we quickly realized that buying new equipment wasn't that much more money, and it was much more reliable. So we started right after we opened. We had tons of people in here. There's a huge amount of interest in our space. We never imagined it would be this popular. Like when we were doing all our projections, we're like, maybe we'll get like 50 people a day. This is the kind of we're trying to plan.
Not like lines out of your door waiting to get in.
I mean, it was amazing that it worked this well, and that so many people wanted to come here. But on the other half of the equation is the expenses, and we realized it's actually way more money to run a business than we thought. So it was good that those things ended up balanced. Yeah, because really it was like we didn't have a clue what we were doing, what we were getting into.
Do you still have your 1-barrel system right here?
Oh yeah, we use it all the time. It's back there. It's our pilot system. We had that from day one too, and that's what we were testing on before we opened.
Got it.
But as we made money, we started to just reinvest everything and buy more and more equipment, to the point where we now just can't fit any more tanks, and we're brewing every hour we can brew, and we're filling as much space as we can fill.
Yeah.
And that's the amount of beer we're making now. And if we want to make more, we've kind of figured out what the options are. It's either open another space and build a new system, or get a new brewing system here that's bigger, but that's going to require like a phased expansion, so we don't have to shut down.
Right, exactly.
Probably put in like a mezzanine, so we have more storage space. So we're working on plans for that, but we'll see how that goes.
Oh, that's very cool.
The other option, of course, would be like contract brewing, which we've explored the concept, but we decided that it wouldn't give us the control we want over the beer, the quality control, and like to get the recipes to taste the way we want on a regular basis. It just didn't make sense to us to have that out of house.
And I think that makes a lot of sense, because when you see that happen, I do feel like there's a dip in quality where they try to, and I think it's definitely the marketing mind of it. They want to make sure that like they can brew it to their metrics, instead of your creativity is limited by their need to put out for their metrics.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I from a fan's perspective, please don't change, because it's wonderful.
I mean, once we kind of explored that idea, we decided that it's not going to be for us.
But you guys have expanded to some sense, because I think you guys have Aeronaut Alston in the summers, right?
Yeah.
I think you had Arlington this last summer.
And those are all seasonal beer gardens.
Right.
There's no production component of that. It's just, but yeah, we've had other outlets, other ways to interact with people, with our beer drinkers, and with our community, and ways of getting our beer out there and having like really fun events that we can't necessarily have here.
Right.
So
louder music,
outdoor space,
outdoor space, dogs.
That's the other thing.
Dogs,
In the winter, this place is jam packed, and come summer, it's still pretty crowded here. But there's people who want to be outside.
Oh my God, I love this beer.
Yeah, so,
sorry.
Well,
Cheers.
Yeah.
While Ron was talking, Mike brought like 4 beers
so
here.
This is, it was alluded to earlier, this is Credibility Gap, it's called.
It's got that
and
banana.
This is a Dunkelweizen. So one of the things, the season, actually, talk about the outside, Alston, one of the things, we were talking about the Hefeweizen.
Right.
Hermann Hefeweizen brand, Hefeweizen. But like summer, Hefeweizen beers are just wonderful summer beers, and they're wonderful. Traditionally it's like the Oompa outside German beer garden beer. It's just a wonderful beer during the summer. And this, we were actually talking, like Hefeweizen is a summer staple here in the brewery, and we sell a lot of it at the outside event, at the off-site events, just because it's such a great sitting around in the summertime beer. But then it's another. I talk about the 3 house yeasts we have. Hefeweizen, what that banana clove character is a yeast byproduct. So it's a different type of yeast that we use. So this is a 4th type of yeast.
Cool.
But one of the things that I wanted to do, and this is towards the end of the summer, so we were brewing the Hefeweizen in the summer, like as a crisp summer beer.
Right.
This is what's called a Dunkelweizen. It's a little darker, a little maltier beer, but with the same yeast. So as summer turned into autumn, we kept the same yeast culture going and made this more amber style beer.
Yeah.
And then for the winter, we just finished up. it's done now, but it's aging a little bit before it comes on, is what's called a Weizenbock. So it's like a strong dark wheat beer. So it's like using the yeast, keeping the yeast, making this light, refreshing beer in the summertime, kind of stepping it up into an ambery beer.
That's
in
cool.
the
Having
autumn,
like a life cycle of the
and then
yeast
making
yield
it,
to seasons. That's really cool.
So and this still has that banana character, but it's a little more. It's still not a heavy beer.
Oh, yeah.
It's less heavy than it looks. It looks.
Yeah, it definitely looks like it's going to be a lot heavier than the other one, but it's not at all.
Wait
like
for the
it's-
Weizenbock. That one gets the heavy.
Oh,
that one has the
I'm all
heaviness.
for it. I'm so ready for it. And that's another thing I want to know is like your guys' variety is stellar. Like we talked about this earlier about the different styles you get out of like the same strains. You guys brew a wide variety, probably the widest variety that I see in the area of beers and styles of beers. And
One
it's
of the
really impressive.
neat things about that, actually, when I was away again, coming back, Ron mentioned that we're contemplating different brew systems and stuff for expanding capacity. But as it is now, I thought it's a little janky, but it has organically grown. So we have
The brewing system?
The brewing system.
Yeah.
So we have a
It's a Franken.
very Frankenberg. It's a Frankenberg, very modified. It's a 10 hectoliter system.
Right.
Nominal 8.5 barrels, but some of our beers we actually push like 11 barrels out of. Some of them. But we also have, so that's like what's called a brew length, one batch, and we do 10 a week, so 2 a day, 5 days a week.
Okay.
So we're making 10, depending all the batches, because of the way we make them, have a slightly different volume. We push it as much as we can, depending upon the beers.
Yeah.
But we also have 3 10-barrel fermenters, 3 20-barrel fermenters, and 6 30-barrel fermenters. So what that allows us to do is, it makes it very complicated scheduling. Thank you very much. Which is
Plus juggling the
first thing
yeast.
I'm doing tomorrow, plus juggling. But what it does is it allows us. So we do have effectively two flagships in Here with Nandu and Hop and Away. So we're making generally 66 batches a week, 60 barrels ish every week of that, but we have all these other brew slots and smaller tanks, so we can do things like this Dunkelweizen, like a Hefeweizen. So we can we can be making all summer long, making Year with Nandu and Hop and Away, making multiple batches, putting them in the bigger tanks.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas, and then slipping in a double of Hermann Hefeweizen, because we're going to want 40 kegs of it.
Right.
And then we can make a Belgian, a sour, 10 barrels of sour, something that's not going to sell the same way as the other. So what it does allow us this flexibility. So we're not making, and then one of the reasons we have such a cool variety, that's one thing I really like about it, being here, is we have this really good variety of beers because we can actually make smaller amounts.
Right.
And you add on the proto system. I call it proto system, but it's a small batch system. So we can make, for instance, coming up for Halloween, we call it Ginger Lantern. It's like a pumpkin beer with ginger in it.
Oh, interesting.
But sometimes, you know what?
Sounds good.
You don't necessarily need 30 barrels of that.
Yeah,
Right.
maybe not.
Right.
You need
One barrel is fine.
Yeah.
One barrel is fine for the weekend.
Or for like messing around with like
messing
new
around with new
ingredients, like
the
you know,
spruce tips.
spruce-
Right.
yeah, like those are really
Um,
expensive. Although actually not necessarily
They
more
were
expensive
cheap,
than
yeah,
hops.
hops, yeah.
But that came out
There's not
awesome.
much
But we did it
that's
on a
less
1
expensive
barrel,
than
scale,
Gotcha.
Or
or
more
there's like weird
expensive than
foraged ingredients
Yeah.
that we
So
can't
that's
do.
actually a good segue in, because we have the founder, creator, lab coat with the PhD in the back, like creating all of this stuff, and the visionary. And then we also have like a technical director here so I guess for your job in the brewery, because since we haven't talked to a technical director at a brewery
I still don't know what it is, by the way.
Okay, perfect.
Make it a
The
big-
guy with the mustache
can,
that knows things.
You look very
Yeah, yeah.
official, so it's good.
Super. We have been believing every single word you
Oh,
said
absolutely.
so far.
This could all be a
Conviction.
lot.
It's all
This
about
could-
conviction.
Yeah.
You may not even work here. Like, just
So is a part of it?
Yeah,
like,
you guys can pay the bar tab later.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, no problem.
they're like, what were you doing
Oh, that's
with
what
those
we
two
need to do?
strangers back there?
Perfect. Let me give you my card. So is part of it like scheduling the runs and marketing? Like, I guess, how do you describe your job for someone who is thinking about trying to get into being a technical director of a brewery?
It's hard to say. Hard to say. I think one of my jobs. So let's just say I've never had a professional job that wasn't in the brewing industry. So I've been in it a long time. I've been in the industry almost 20 years. Started at a brew pub in Texas in the mid-90s. So one of the things that I think I do here, I don't do a lot of day-to-day brewing. I brew at least once a week, so I know how to do it. But we have a rotating team of 3 to 4 brewers, multiple shifts, all the time. One of the things I think I do is help tie together the hands-on guys in the back. Like I said, I answer a lot of questions all day. Is what I
answer a lot of questions.
I answer a lot of questions.
I was gonna say,
but then I tie it with the vision of the founders, and because we also have Mark is helping develop recipes. We have some people who have never worked at a brewery before. We have a very diverse staff here, which is another positive thing. I think in general, we have a very diverse clientele here, which I think is another strong suit of Aeronaut.
Yeah.
But sort of, I try to kind of behind the scenes orchestrate a lot of the other stuff.
Gotcha.
And then a lot of
Implementation.
Thank you very much. Implementation of the owners and other directors in the company, and integrating that with
a lot of it's like best practices.
Yeah.
And like
we have
our quality
experience.
meetings, where we talk about what are some quality things we want to improve, or what are quality issues we're concerned about, and a lot of that comes down to day-to-day practices in the brewery, or you think about how with the flow of beer from the kettle to the fermenter to the packaging line, and what's involved, and like I have a general sense of that, but I don't know the details, right? And Mike knows all this stuff, and I think you said something like, "Oh, what does someone who's aspiring to be a technical director want to think about?" I would say
clean kegs.
Like I would say first like learn to brew.
That they need to do.
Yeah, and like. Because that's not something you start out at. You start out brewing, and I think the reason Mike's in this role is because he has years of experience and knows, how things are done at different scales and different places, and, can sort of weigh in on what the best way to do things is. And he has the wisdom to say that we can trust his opinion on these things.
Right.
And we do have a lot of people who are new to the brewing industry that we would like to train and bring up to become brewers, but they don't necessarily have that
I think
background.
Part of it is also the aspect of most of the people here have never worked at another brewery, and so if you live in a town with 20 people, you're only going to ever know what those 20 people own. No,
Right.
but I have not all of it was glamorous work. Like I started cleaning kegs at Harpoon for a year, doing nothing but cleaning kegs at Harpoon and scrubbing the bottom tank legs and stuff like that.
Right.
But during that time, I picked up a lot. And over the years, I've managed to pick up a lot of, experience and gleaning as much information as I can from not only places I've worked, but now I have a network of friends that colleagues.
We see that a lot. That this industry breeds a lot of like knowledge through osmosis, where they go in, they learn from everyone around them, and it migrates to another setting, and it just builds and builds.
Absolutely.
So it's very cool because you see that consistently from everyone that we've interviewed, is they had the exact same statement of like, I took this from here and built upon it here, and it just continues to grow. So
that's very traditional. That's again I love doing this job. Like it's the like I was saying, it's one of the old. It's a guild style apprenticeship, journeyman, and like you learn by doing. And it's like
it's also interesting because it's a growing industry. There's so many more breweries, so many more people I would imagine working in this field than there were 10 years ago.
Right.
So they got to learn from someone, right? So they're all looking to the people who've been there,
Right.
And that's getting spread among thousands and thousands of people. So
it's funny, all the people I know, like I worked at Harpoon for 10 years. That's where I got a lot of my experience and my knowledge and my colleagues. But it's funny now, all these people, like there's one brewery, he's a good friend of mine, but he owns his own brewery now, and I specifically remember the day I taught him how to open a grain bag.
Oh, right.
But it's just so cool to see
Yeah.
this almost diaspora of people who I worked with as apprentice brewers at Harpoon are now almost everyone I worked with owns their own brewery or is in a managerial position.
Gotcha. So now that you're here and you're technical director of a brewery, what's your favorite part about that?
Less heavy lifting.
There's
still a significant amount of heavy lifting, but I can occasionally delegate it. No, it's cool to you know. I came up in an era of no matter where you go, there was a blonde ale, an amber ale, an IPA, and a dark beer, and a seasonal. That was like standard, no matter where you went. Right. That's what it was.
You got to cover the gamut.
And then all at the same time, being a beer geek, it was a little more, not to say, it was a little more special back then. It was like you had to seek things out. It wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now.
Right.
And so to me, I have an emotional attachment to a lot of this stuff,
Right.
And having had to learn it the hard, I didn't go to brewing school because they weren't really brewing schools around. I learned by cleaning tank legs and cleaning kegs and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning. But it's really nice to have been around long enough to see it come to fruition and see all those that like niche. It annoys me sometimes because it's not quite, it's rose-colored glasses looking at the past when I was like. But it's like really cool to mention like a saison and have someone know what you're talking about instead of like, who's the weirdo with the sandals and socks? Like those are people who drank saisons with beards and like whatever. Yeah. So it's like it's kind of neat to see to have kind of stayed in the same place and the tide has risen around me.
Yes,
which is kind of neat.
So Ron, the same thing to you. Like, what's your favorite thing? Because so you started out, you were just like kind of like home brewing. You were a student, you got your PhD, and now you have this like crazy brewery that's very successful. What's your favorite part about this now?
I don't know. When you say that, like I think about when we started up, right? And what got me inspired to do this, and it was like we were brewing, and we liked to make the beer and all that. But I think the thing that made me at least want to start a brewery and turn it into a business and a career was not so much like the beer and the drinking the beer and the making the beer, but the whole building the process, like building the equipment, figuring out controls, that kind of engineering aspects of it, and figuring out how can we adjust this system to get a different result. The tinkering and experimentation, which is, I guess I'm a scientist by training, so that's the thing I liked about it. And it's nice to have a product, that you can drink, that you can see people share and enjoy.
I guess that makes it more exciting as it gets more successful too, as the need to tinker actually increases. So you need to get more creative as you go along.
Yes,
every single minute of the day.
Oh yeah, and it's crazy, like the amount of work that goes in just making the beer. But to me now, when I think about what I like about it and why I like, owning a brewery, is not so much the beer as the product, but the brewery itself as the product. Right. Like the building of the space and the people that come in and like the experiences that they have. Yeah. So when I like walk around, on a nice night here, and there's like a lot of people here, and they're having a good time. They're talking to the bartenders. I just like sometimes you just like
music going on.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. We haven't gotten too much into that, but like one of our hallmarks, our signature of like Aeronaut is bringing in the community. We say we like to amplify the voice of the community. We bring in artists and give them a place to perform, like musicians. We have art on the wall from local, visual artists. We have our thing in Austin, so I'll go there on like a Wednesday night. We'll have 2 or 3 bands playing in this beer garden, food trucks, and I just like sometimes I go there and it's running so well. There's like 300 people there. There's bands playing. It's like the place you want to be.
Yeah.
And I just kind of take it all in, and it's just being able to say that we created this whole environment is awesome. And the fact that we have more things we can do, new things we can create. This year we did Arlington for the first year, that beer garden. We have continual like new ideas for events and programming, and some of them are educational, some of them are cultural. It's every day. We have an arts and culture coordinator. We have a community coordinator. Those are both full-time jobs that we have here of people who just, that's what they do. They figure out how to integrate those things into the events we do. And then, of course, there's, we do continue to develop recipes and ideas and beer names, and we're thinking about the future.
Always the beer names.
The beer names.
Sorry.
Well,
It comes back.
Sorry.
They're so important.
but yeah, it is important, and it's like the brand and the beer is very important.
Right.
And, so we have to be thinking about all those different things, and it's actually a large array of different skills and things you have to think about. Something is like branding and beer naming is a very subjective, and you just have to have a sense of like what sounds cool, what do people like, what's going to work with our brand, but then on the other hand you have things like what is the technically correct way to add capacity to our brewery without affecting day-to-day production or customer experience, or what new yeast should we be experimenting with that won't adversely impact the rest of our production, or there's all kinds of things like that you're thinking about.
I think one of the naming conventions that just has stuck with me, and it's definitely because of Douglas Adams' just fandom, but Probability Drive, I adore.
And
so
the funny thing about that is that
was the most only
delicious.
organic. That was a lightning strike.
Oh yeah,
that was a great
Suddenly it was
beer
like we
naming
all
experience.
turned around and we're
We all
like,
agreed.
holy shit, that's the name.
The funny thing, the irony there is, so the way that came about is that was a collab beer with Finback.
Yep.
And so we're like, well, we're doing this collab beer, and our thing is Aeronaut, space travel. That's not always our thing, but that's one of our big themes. And their thing is the whale. And we're like, how do you combine
And I
the
had
whale
just
and space?
finished reading Hitchhiker. What are the Hitchhikers books?
And I had just been reading it to my
Yeah.
nephew. He was reading it, and so I was reading him from the book. And we talked about that, and we're
space and
space.
whale.
And then all of a sudden it was like, someone said, I don't even know who it was. Somebody said, it was what do they call that? I remember because I was like, oh yeah, the whale falling down. And it was Ben was like, oh, what do they call that? And Ben was like, Improbability Drive. And all of a sudden everyone was just like, and this was before we started these meetings. This was at the bar. And all of a sudden everyone just like, we found it! It was
the
a
bar
moment.
stool squeaking.
It happened. Oh my god.
But the funny thing is that would be sort of against our naming convention, because we try not to have pop culture references in our names, because the world of our beers is this imaginary world where none of our day-to-day experiences exist. So we're not going to have a beer named after a historical figure, or we do have a few examples of that. But
That's
that,
amazing.
yeah, but
001.
but going forward, that's not our plan, But because this was a collab with an outside brewery, we're like, well, those conventions don't apply.
It's on
Whatever.
them.
We liked it. Yeah. You just got to rationalize your way through these things. So
we haven't really talked much about the artwork yet, so I definitely want to make sure we cover that as well. And I think the best way to dive right into that is one of my favorites that I think I've seen come out here, which was last year's around Thanksgiving.
Oh my God, the Thanksgiving one, the sour?
First Steps on a Sour Planet.
Do you even know?
we have shirts now.
We got long sleeve t-shirts that
No
came in
way.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Freaking turkey, just
The turkey.
wreaking havoc on people.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love it.
May
so
have made an
much.
appearance on a previous episode.
Yes.
may
Space
have gone on
Pilgrim.
for way too long.
Something on a sour planet. Was that what it was?
First
It's
Steps.
called First Thanksgiving.
First Thanksgiving
So
on a sour planet.
there's we have
we just brewed it.
we are
you did?
no we're it's next. It's a week and a half away.
Oh,
We
okay.
haven't brewed it yet.
It's on the schedule.
It's on the schedule.
I'm all
I have
over
to
that.
go buy the apples next week, next Monday. As a matter of fact.
Oh my gosh.
Or
it
the
was so
cider.
good.
But the artwork on that
Yeah.
was
So
phenomenal.
that was
amazing.
that's that's Raul.
Raul Gonzalez III. You want to? Should I give him a sneak preview of the?
You can go.
the
I'll
next-
give a little
Please.
The
You can describe it. No one else.
yeah.
will be
Well,
able
the
to see it.
Yeah,
first
sure.
steps on a sour
We'll just ooh
planet.
and ah.
So we have a sour, like a Berliner Weiss kettle. It's called a kettle sour, where it's a multi-day where it allows us to safely use non-yeast bacteria in the brewery by doing it what's called on the hot side, where we do it in the kettle before we boil the beer, so we can add the souring bacteria and let it sour for 2 days, and then we boil the beer as normal.
Right.
So it stretches the brewing time out. We work with weekends to do it. We do it over the weekend. But so what first step, and again with the whole astronomical theme, like the Aeronaut theme, and this and that, and that was called. I love the name. First Steps on a Sour Planet. There's the first Thanksgiving right there.
Yeah.
It's a
So Sour Planet is
first
our
sour planet is
so
it. So like First Steps on a Sour Planet is our sort of base kettle sour beer, and then that we've kind of brand extended that where we do a passion fruit sour planet is a big one.
Which I think, did you guys roll that out as pilot first, or one of your like P
It
series?
was a cask, I think.
Is that right?
It was before my time, but I'm
And
fairly
then
certain.
we canned that beer. That's the only one of those ones that we've
Yeah.
canned.
But then the
fruit
first
sour.
Thanksgiving is first Thanksgiving on a sour planet. We did a
so
guava
good.
sour planet.
Yeah.
We've done
That
a
was
couple
really
others.
smooth. I love the guava.
The guavas are really good. We should do that one again.
So
Again,
we've
it's
done
hard because,
changes.
like, again, we do them on this, like I was saying, how that we have the ones, the twos, 10s, the 20s, the 30s. This is like a 10, so it's like limited, and it also has to match up with when one of those tanks is open in order to let us do this longer process. So, but we do it, we pretty much do it whenever we can. Whenever those things all line up, we take advantage of it and do a sour beer.
But we're doing that one, the first Thanksgiving. We're
We're doing it.
we got the labels in today. We're gonna bottle it again,
Yep. Small scale bottling.
and so we're working on other big thing where there's been a lot of demand for us to can the King Louis,
King Louis.
which is like So I think we're gonna finally do it, and we're working on the
I have
label
not
art.
seen that.
This is the preview of the label art for King Louis. Nothing like any of us expected.
Is
but
that
we're
Raul?
we talk about Raul Gonzalez, the third.
Oh, that is phenomenal.
That is mean.
Oh, that's so
So
good.
that's-
That is so mean.
So
His
that's
artwork
King
is
Louis.
phenomenal.
He's great,
I
right?
It's
love
all
it.
pens.
And the best results we get
There's
with him.
so many
are like-
references in there.
It's crazy, and that's the thing. You look at the artwork, and then the more you look at it, the more interesting stuff you find.
Absolutely.
And what we found is like the best work we get. This is Raul. He does all the Nandu labels. He's done a lot of other labels for us. We've started to branch out a little more, but he's sort of like been our main label artist over the years. Though he's become super busy, so it's hard to get
he's
him.
moved out of town.
Yeah, but he. So for this one, we had this idea of King Louis. Everyone thinks about like the Jungle Book.
Yeah.
But like, he's like, well, it doesn't have to be that way. Plus, it's kind of contrary to our idea of like no pop culture.
Yeah.
And so to him, he was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do the Jungle Book.
Right.
And so, the best thing is when you don't give him any restrictions, and you're just like, just do whatever you want. I don't care. And then he gives you something that's like totally out there. And you're like, oh, but
It's
this
like,
is like
yes.
amazing. Like when you let him do what he wants to do.
Right.
So he does this thing, and it's like, I don't know where
That
he
is
came up with this.
absolutely phenomenal.
I don't
I'm
know.
So
It's
excited.
so good.
I'm
though.
excited for this to come out. This label.
It's
There's
just got
so
so,
many
much
little things
on
in
there.
there.
I do
Oh.
love how he brings back, or you guys bring back a lot of your characters in there.
Yeah,
I
your
think that it's
little
just
robot.
so awesome.
And they've just like accumulated over time.
Yeah, it just
like,
keeps building. And
That's
it's
also
They've
just him
accumulated
doing, like,
that
what he
it's
wants
him
to
doing that is what, and he's built upon it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So, like, the
I
Hop
feel
Hop
it started
Rabbit
with
is
the foot
there.
Tap, but we like obviously recognize every single.
Oh,
one
we're
of those
witnessing a
other
man
characters.
losing his mind, but I think it's beautiful. I think it's something that's just,
Yeah.
it's phenomenal. Like it's so identifiable. Again, like it's just, it's so.
And
good.
there's like a story to every character. Like the ghost is like from the original Nandu label, which was based on a real, us telling him about our first Halloween party,
Right.
and people were dressed up as ghosts, and like so then he just like took that and turned it into a character.
And then the
like,
fish car.
The fish car is kind of like the fish car, which was an actual car that was shaped like a fish that used to park outside.
Right.
And then
Oh,
we
that's
had
funny.
the robot Crush is the robot, and he's wearing like a medal because it won the gold medal for the GABF.
Oh
that
my
beer, so-
gosh, I didn't even
Hop
know
Hop
that.
the rabbit.
Yeah, the
That's
rabbit,
so
the hop
great.
hopping away rabbit.
Did you guys start using the Yeti? I remember stumbling
The
down
Yeti's
here
not
during
here.
I didn't see him in there, but I remember stumbling down here during a snowstorm one time, and like the Yeti was here, and there was a big snowball fight, and like, I adored that moment. It's like,
You mean the guy in the costume?
Oh, yeah,
So
absolutely.
that was the basis for the Yeti being on our can
that's what I was
that
wondering,
event.
Because that was another story that they related to Raoul
yes.
that turned into
Yeah. So now it's like a character,
Yeah.
but it's all based on real life stuff that's
That's
happened.
really cool.
Yeah. There's all kinds of, yeah. The original 1 year with Dr. Nandu, the first set of labels, the first time we did it it was like on our first anniversary, there was a 4-pack and each label was different. And each label represented a season from the year, so it was like spring, summer, fall, winter.
That's why you see the squirrel is one of them.
Yeah, the squirrel is the spring, and he was on a maple tree.
He hasn't done much more Raoul. There was another Adam. That's a painting. One of the. Adam's kind of run with the squirrel. He's done a couple of our labels too. Adam O'Day.
That painting's actually awesome, by the way, too.
Yeah, so he did a few labels, and when he does our labels, he literally does these massive oil paintings, and that's the label. That was a label.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
and Raoul does them with thick pen.
Yeah. Wow. So they're all like red and blue, pretty much, because he uses red and blue.
The detail is just phenomenal in his work each time. So I adore it. I love all the logos. I have so many of the glasses that I just like stare at all the time, like, oh, it's amazing and stuff. It's so good. So where are you guys going from here? Like, I know you guys have grown so much.
Toledo!
To the moon!
Toledo!
No.
Oh no, Albuquerque. Should have taken a left at Albuquerque.
No, I don't know. I mean, I talked
project
about
in the works.
big projects. Yeah, but they're all top secret.
Oh,
That's how it works.
I don't know. I mean,
half secret ones.
we're trying to, as I was saying, we're trying to increase the amount of beer we can make.
Yeah.
So we've been working pretty heavily with this engineer on how we can get this bigger system in here and start, getting taller tanks, bigger equipment, kind of getting rid of some of our smaller stuff. But it's going to be a process. And meanwhile, we want to design it in such a way that we can still do the kind of small batch brewing that allows us to do all this, variety of interesting beers. So maybe a bigger system that can also do smaller batches on occasion. So that's kind of like from the beer standpoint what we want to do here. Right. I think we're still looking for our next location. This space isn't going anywhere. But we've been exploring a lot, thinking about, if we open another space, where is that going to be? What is it that we want it to be like? And our thoughts on that have changed kind of over time as we've sort of seen how our business has developed, how the industry has changed a little bit. I don't think we're going to end up building, a giant 30,000 barrel brewery. I think we'll more likely we'll do something sort of like another version of this, but maybe like more experimental.
Neighborhood breweries are where it's going now.
Yeah, and that's what we do well.
There's not going to be another Harpoon happening.
No, nor is that the thing is when you have something that's the size of Harpoon, you lose the flexibility that we have. You can't do a lot of small scale experimentation. Right. If you have a recipe that's popular, you've put so much resources and capital behind it that you can't just abandon your flagship beer. You're just this giant ship that takes a long time to reorient itself.
Right.
So we don't want to be in that position. We want to retain flexibility, but somehow make more beer. Maybe not 10 times as much beer, but maybe 3 or 4 times as much beer, and get in front of more people.
Yeah, taking on that test kitchen kind of mentality of going on and trying to
do more interesting stuff that no one else is doing. And the thing I think, and you can tell me this from the perspective of someone who's been here and experienced the place, but I think most people, when they think about our brand, they don't just they think about the beer. Hopefully they think they love the beer, but they also think about the experiences they've had here and the space and what we do and the kind of events we have. And that's always been our big thing.
I heard at one point there was some article that mentioned, it stuck with me, and I just think it stuck with me in a pleasant way. It's called a zany beer hall.
A zany
beer hall.
Yeah,
I love that. That's what we are. We're a zany neighborhood brewery.
Yeah, we have held you guys up so long, but it's been so amazing. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Oh yeah, no, please don't let us stop you.
Oh, that's
don't worry, you're not. I am right.
You guys have recently redone your bathrooms. I guess we can do another half hour.
Oh my god!
Oh, yeah.
No, we can do a 4-hour epic about that.
Let me just say, just for the record, there's been, for a long time we were full. We would have these huge lines.
Right.
And the reason for that was because we were not allowed to have a higher occupancy than what we had, because in large part because of the bathrooms. They weren't big enough to accommodate more people. So the city wouldn't give us a bigger occupancy.
Right.
And we have people coming in saying, "Oh, you're artificially creating lines because you want
like,
it to."
it's not that full.
And it was like, no, we want to let as many people as
No, we
possible
love
in
having
here.
angry people outside.
Yeah, not to mention not selling beer. So so we put in a huge amount of time and resources into we actually brought in a whole new sewer line and water line so that we could accommodate bathrooms that are enormous. I think there's 13 toilets.
Yeah,
in there.
they're massive now.
And but great toilets.
Great
Line.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So now we
toilets,
actually
beautiful
have-
toilets. Best toilets. Nothing but the best toilets.
Oh yeah.
5-star Yelp review on the toilets.
But so now we have, so now those lines are, we're letting in 200 people, 200 plus people when we're open. So no problem.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for letting us come in and talk to you guys for a little bit. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much. We're definitely going to be back here again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think fairly often.
Yeah, all the time. Thanks a lot, guys.
Awesome. Cheers.
So thanks again to Aeronaut Brewing Company co-owner Ronn Friedlander and brewery technical director Mike Smith for having us at the brewery and feeding us some delicious brews. You can email your questions, comments, and concerns and rants to us at somervilleandbrewcast@gmail.com, and please follow us on Twitter at SVBrewcast and on Instagram, Somerville and Brewcast. Also visit our website, buy some swag at www.somervilleandbrewcast.com. Thanks everyone for listening, and until next time, beep boop bop beer.